Guilty Savage here, and on this EVE tutorial, I'm going to be talking about tanking. Now there are 3 different ways you can tank, and 2 different types of tanking. And the first way you can tank is passively, where you don't have to activate anything. And then there's active tanking, where you do have to activate stuff. And then there is speed tanking, where you basically are going so fast you avoid some of the damage. Now most frigates do some kind of speed tanking if you want to. If you're running level 1 missions, you'll realize that it is pretty effective still. And I have 3 different ships I'm going to be showing. One is a Caldari Kestrel, a missile boat that I really enjoy. And then there's a Gallente Tristan, another good ship, it's a drone ship. And then there is a Venture, the basic mining ship. Now for all of these ships that I have, I'm mainly just showing the active tanking, but this one doesn't have as much of an active tank as you would think. All you have to do is turn this on once the fight starts, and this increases your resistances, and that basically makes you take less damage. Now a really effective thing to do while you're on missions is to load the right kind of damage that the enemy is doing. And you can easily do that by, once you start a mission, you can read what kind of enemy you're fighting, and then you can look it up and see what kind of damage that they're doing. And then also on my Kestrel, I have a speed tank. I can go very fast inside the ship with this build that I've put, and I do have a lot of skills, so I can kind of switch up which kind of build that I want, but you'll want to stick to more of the basics. And on most frigates, and generally if you're doing PvP, you're going to want this damage control. I have the Tech 2 version, which requires more skills, but it's easy to get the Tech 1 version. So on this ship, I have increased resistances, I have the speed tanking, and then I also increase the amount of shield that I have on this ship. Now when you're increasing your resistances, you're usually going to want to have more shield, but you can also do a fit where you repair the damage that you take. Now both can be effective, very effective, and depending on the ship, you'll want to do both kinds. And if we open the ship tree, you can see again the different races that there are. Caldari mostly focus on shields, but if you look at a ship called the Drake, now this is a very good shield tank, and it does mostly passive when you're doing PvE and PvP. But then you take something like the ship that I always use for missions, it is mostly an active tanking ship, where you'll have a nice booster. You won't have as much shielding, but you'll be able to repair it really well. Then you have races like the Gallente and the Amarr, and also some of the Mimitar ships where they focus on armor. And you can always see that when you hover over it, you can see which kind of tank it does. If it says armor, you generally want to follow armor tanking. But that does not limit you to what you can use. And on this Kestrel you can see that it does say shields, and you can use the shields quite effectively. And another way you can tell which kind of tank it does, shields are always going to be inside this medium slot, where armor tanking is always on these lower slots. Now on my Tristan, because it's a drone ship, I do have one item on my lower slot that increases drones. And another thing with this active tanking, you have to be aware of your capacitor. EVE is very focused on different kind of math, and you can see how fast this depletes. But you also have to consider that you have an afterburner on, and if you put it offline, it goes up. So this is one of the smaller afterburners, and it doesn't take up much, and you don't always have to constantly use it. But because this ship has an active tank, and I'm a little bit worried about how much capacitor I have something that gives me more energy, and that is a cat booster. And then on to the Venture. Now it has the same kind of tank as the Kestrel, where I have a shield extender and then more resistances. And you will be limited to how much you can fit onto your ship, and they've kind of balanced this game very well. Obviously they've had to rebalance some things, but generally, because they have such good math on all of this stuff, they know your limits. So you'll never be too powerful, but that also means that no matter what ship you're using, you can survive, and if you know what you're doing, you can be very effective. Now you can see on this ship, I have plenty of CPU left and plenty of power grid left because I'm mostly focusing on mining and how effective my mining is on this. And I leave the damage to my drones. That is also the same thing on this ship. You don't even have to have any weapons on a drone ship. You can completely let your drones do everything, but because I want to focus more on survivability and to show active tanking with armor, I've made this more suited for that. Now you can, like the shield extender, you can increase the amount of armor you have, but I just went again for the resistances. Now this thing doesn't give me much resistances for armor, but it gives me hull damage resistance. And for a frigate, it's good, and for level 1 missions, you'll mostly want to use your speed and how much damage you do. Obviously, if you kill some of the enemies, you won't take as much damage. For each ship, you can always look up fits, and you can always look up PvE fits, because if you're doing missions, it's very different from doing PvP, or you're out exploring somewhere and you're taking the damage. Generally, there's going to be more enemies, and after you kill some of them, their damage is going to go down. So you want to survive the initial damage, and then be able to stay in there long enough to where you can start taking down the damage and you can kill all of them without having to leave, to make it more effective. And if you take too much damage, you should always try to leave as soon as you can. Now I'm not going to explain the fittings in too much detail on this, and I'm going to show you how effective my tanking is. Now I do have more skills on this character, so my tanking is a little bit better than when you're first starting out. But you'll get the idea of how effective going fast is, and the difference between the shield booster and using a resistance. Now I prefer on frigates avoiding the damage, so you increase the amount of resistance you have and you increase the speed that you go. And if you can fit that effectively, then you'll realize how little damage you take instead of trying to repair that damage. Now when you're going onto the market, you'll have to learn where your stuff is, but the categories make it pretty easy. So armor and hull, that's when you're armor tanking. Shields is when you're shield tanking. And your boosters, that repairs your shields. It basically gives you a boost of how much shield you have. Then the extenders, name's obvious, they increase how much shield you have. Then you have the hardeners, it increases your resistances, but you have to activate them. Then you have your shield resistance. They increase your resistance, but you don't have to activate them. And if you're going more into passive tanking, then you'll want to increase the passive recharge rate. And then you'll have these 3 different kinds. The flux coils, says it right here, it increases your recharge rate, but lowers the amount of shield that you have. So if you have a really good recharge rate, you won't need as much shield. Then the power relays basically makes you have less capacitor, but increases your recharge rate. And then shield rechargers. This goes on your medium slot, so it doesn't have as much of a disadvantage like the other 2 do, and increases your recharge rate. So these are all good for passive tanking. And again with armor and hull, you have the hardeners, which increases the resistance, but you have to activate it. Then armor plates, it increases how much armor you have. Then you have the armor repairers, that's the activated thing where it repairs the damage that you've taken. Then you have the energized plating, basically increases your resistances without having to activate it. Then you have your resistance plating, again it increases the resistances without having to activate it. Damage control is always good to have on frigates or when you're doing PvP, because it increases your resistances inside your shield, armor, and hull. Then you have your layered plating, gives you a bonus to how much you have, but it goes off a percentage. So if your ship has a large amount of armor, these can also be really effective. And then you have reactive armor hardener. It increases all the resistances, starting 15% each. Now I'm going to show you the different types of tanking on these frigates in use on a level 1 mission. And the first thing I'm going to use is this Kestrel. I'm going to show the effectiveness of going fast. And I've also equipped rockets because I've mostly focused on more tank, but the rockets still do great damage. When you go on your defense, it shows in good detail how much resistance you have everywhere and what your effective HP is. And this is how much damage you can take before you blow up, generally. But if you have something like a shield booster or an armor repairer, it repairs your damage. So this number isn't always a completely accurate way to know how strong you are. And you can see, since I can also activate this, since I've activated that, it increased my effective HP. And if you turn it off, you'll see it drop down again. Now, it's always good to read about your mission before you go there, because some missions, it's more later on once you get into level 2 and level 3 and level 4 especially, sometimes they don't allow you to warp out. They'll have warp disruptors. And also there's triggers, meaning when you kill a certain NPC, they'll trigger more enemies. Now for this mission, it also shows that, since I've looked it up, and I'll post a link to a website that I use of how to look up your missions. But in this one it shows that when I warp into this place, I'm going to get attacked by an initial group, and if I approach the other ones too quickly, or if I get into a certain range, they'll attack me. I'm not too worried about how much damage they're going to do, and I believe I can handle them all, especially since I have my tank set up in a good way. So when you warp into your mission area, you want to let the initial group attack you, and then when new ones show up, depending on if they log on to you, you'll want to engage them. And once they log on to me, I'm going to activate this because I don't want to take as much damage. And again, your effective range, these can hit within 13 kilometers, so I'm going to need to get as close to them as possible. You know the orbit, I'm going to do 10 kilometers. So you can see, since there's a lot of enemies, they're going to do more damage at the beginning, but since I want to outlast that damage, that's why I have a PvE setup. But I'm doing good damage and they won't be able to hit me very hard. You can see, since I have good resistances, they're not doing very much damage to me. Now if I go faster, they'll do even less damage. I'm going to set up my effective orbit, or default orbit, to 10 km, and I'm just going to click orbit. And yeah, these guys can't even do much damage to me because I go out of their range easily. And since these guys can't even get into my range, they're not even doing any damage. This one that's red is the only one that's actually able to shoot me, and he isn't doing very much damage. Now since these guys are pretty fast, they're also using that speed tanking, but I can also slow them down if I orbit at a closer range. But this afterburner that I'm using, or micro warp drive, is actually taking up a lot of my capacitor. So you can turn that on and turn it off depending on how much damage you're taking. Or if you need to get away, you can also turn it on. Get out of the area and be able to warp out. Okay, but for now, it shows you how effective this tank is. Now, if I had a repair, I'd basically do the exact same thing. Instead of resisting this damage, I would just repair what was missing. Now my Tristan is set up in the same way, so I'm going to show you that. Well, one thing you can notice, because I don't have a shield booster, I can't repair the damage that I've taken. It's only off of the passive and default repair that it does. But if you dock at a station, your shield automatically goes back to full. Same thing with your capacitor. When you start this game, you may not have all the skills that you need for all the different kind of tanking that you want to do, but that's where, once you find a fit that you want or a ship that you want, you can also look it up. And then you can focus on those kind of skills if you're not sure what skills to train. Now this ship has a bit more of an active tank because I have an actual armor repair. I'm going to be repairing the damage that I take instead of just resisting. But again, I'm using speed since I'm a frigate, and I'm mostly going to focus my damage by using drones. Because I have my drones trained up to level 5, I can use 5 drones at once. Also, another great thing when you're using a drone ship, you can basically try to stay out of their range. You can basically try to stay out of the rain and let your drones do all the damage. But drones can also get attacked. That's the only disadvantage. And because I'm an armor tank, I'm not worried about any shield damage that I'm taking. And a good idea before you engage your next target, you should return your drones to your drone bay. So that way they don't get attacked. And you'll see once I get too close, these guys are going to engage me. Taking too long, so I'm going to activate my afterburner. Alright, so I've gotten too close to them. Now they're going to start engaging me. Again, I'm going to change my default orbit. Oh, he's already dead. My effective damage range. Set my drones to attack everything. And engage targets as well. I'm actually just going to orbit the biggest one that I'm not attacking at the moment. And then my drones do their thing. Okay, since I'm doing good with my speed tanking, they're not even doing very much damage to me. So I'm actually gonna slow down, let myself take some damage. Let my drones just kill everything. Alright, I'll show it once new enemies show up. These guys are starting to do more damage since I've made myself go slower. Alright, 2 new people showed up. Now when somebody new shows up, they may just automatically engage your drones, so be careful of that. I'm just going to return them to my drone bay. Alright, so now these guys are actually doing pretty good damage. Since there's two of them. He hasn't even engaged me yet. Alright, so now I'm actually starting to take armor damage. And once I've taken enough, I'm going to activate my repairer. This is also a good way to show that you don't always need to activate it, because my passive regeneration's keeping me alive well enough. These guys are actually missing me a lot still. Alright, so now I've taken enough damage. So I'm going to activate that and let loose my drones. So you can see I can stay alive very well inside of these conditions. Even with both, and if I increase my speed, I don't have to worry about taking so much damage. If I wanted to, I could try to avoid their damage altogether. And my capacitor's been fine throughout this entire fight, so if anything I could also switch this out to increase more damage. Put a target painter or something on. Alright, and that again shows like when you're using drones, you can just have them engage the target while you're flying away. So you're basically kiting them. They won't get close enough to you for you to take damage, but you can also do enough damage to them because your drones are engaged to them right next to them. So even though I'm not shield tanking whatsoever, these guys have done such little damage to me that my shield has actually been the thing that I've tanked with most. And now they drop the item I need to complete my mission, and I've shown the different ways you can tank. I personally prefer shield tanking, and even with some of these drone ships for the Gallente, you can still shield tank them. And it's actually more effective because you can focus on drone damage and then use your shields for tanking. Then also focus on this and you can basically whole tank. And the same thing kind of goes with this ship as the Venture, the mining ship, because I use the drones to do the damage and I basically just try to resist or stay away from them long enough for my drones to finish them off and I don't have to worry. And I hope this video was helpful in explaining the different ways you can tank. Now there's a lot of different fittings and you can always look them up, and I provided the link down below, so make sure you check that out. And if you're doing missions, make sure you check out which kind of damage that they're doing, so you can tank even more effectively against them. And I've also posted which kind of damage the normal pirates do. Thank you guys for watching, and if you have any questions or you'd like to see a certain kind of tutorial, let me know in the comments or find me on Eve. And be sure to check out my other videos, and I'll see you next time.